Happy Thursday. So, what we're going to do here is continue with our discussion of the March on Washington. So if you can take out that worksheet from yesterday and put your desk next to your partner. Here come the documents. Document E. This is a good one. You're going to like this one. Malcolm X. Okay. Reliability. Is this a speech that we're going to believe before we even read it? What do you think?
Kind of. It'll have some truth to it, but chances are because it's Malcolm X, there'll be some incentive to antagonize whites.
Nice, nice. So the concept that he'll have some truth, but he might have a bias to that truth. Okay, so Ferris is going to start us off, but follow along, of course, so we can hear what Malcolm X has to say about the March on Washington. All right, take it away, Ferris.
The Negroes were out on the streets. They were talking about how they were going to march on Washington, march on the Senate, march on the White House, march on the Congress, and tie it up, bring it to a halt.
Developed at Stanford University, Reading Like a Historian is a curriculum that engages students in historical inquiry via primary source documents. Instead of memorizing dates and facts, students explore different perspectives on historical events and learn to formulate opinions backed by documentary evidence.
So I guess history is conventionally taught in the sense that you have a teacher in front of the classroom lecturing on material, telling the students what happened.
The Reading Like a Historian approach kind of turns that on its head, and what it says is that history is actually complex, and history is not just plain fact, it's actually an aggregation of a bunch of people's opinions and perspectives. We're going to read two documents that describe Gandhi's philosophy and a document that describes Ho Chi Minh's philosophy. So these are two people who, faced with injustice, right, faced with the imperialism, the colonizers who are occupying their country, have tried to figure out what is the best way for me to gain my freedom.
I would describe Reading Like a Historian as an approach at historical thinking. And historical thinking being the skills that historians use. And so historians think about the type of documents they're reading. And they use skills to do that. What we call source, or when was this written, why was it written. They also think about the context of the time. And so Reading Like a Historian takes those basic skills and brings it to a classroom for students to answer a fundamental question.
The first thing that this program does that's very different from a conventional history class is that it turns history into a series of questions rather than a series of answers.
On your timeline, I'd like you to write today's questions. We make sure that we're constantly coming back to this as we look at it. And the question is, was the U.S. planning to go to war with Vietnam before the Gulf of Tonkin?
Then you begin using the skills of Reading Like a Historian. So we always begin with sourcing it, trying to understand who wrote this document and what was their intent in it.
And we're going to begin with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. That's going to be our first document.
So what I discovered is that historians and very good high school readers actually look at historical texts in quite different ways. Historians, for example, look at a document and immediately read the first few words and go down to the bottom of the document and ask themselves questions like, who wrote this? When was it written? What else would I need to know to make a considered and valued judgment?
Because it's a memoir and it's based on his recollection, he may have some holes in his knowledge, or because of his bias, he was an activist, he may try to exaggerate, maybe.
Sourcing is simply the notion that before we accept information as fact or true, we ask a series of elementary questions. Who wrote the information? Where did it come from? When was it written? By whom? Etc.
In general, I found that a lot of my students actually enjoy reading primary source documents because they find it a lot more interesting. They find they actually understand the material a lot better because they really feel like they are getting the perspective of somebody who went through that time period.
It's not not even the Gulf of Tonkin has happened yet, and it's already saying to use military force against Vietnam. I think that this whole document is gonna be about going to war.
So they're already speaking about war before anything happens, so that none of the other
countries the basic presidential decision. Working with this primary documents, sometimes it's harder, and depending on the subject. Because sometimes the document might not give you a lot of details about it, what makes you think more, which makes it a little bit harder, but at the same time, it makes it easier to learn the subject.
So the three skills we focused on this year are sourcing, contextualization or context, and corroboration. And the context is everything that's happening at that general time period and trying to bring in all the information of a particular time period to a document or a textbook passage that you are reading. Let's go quickly to number 3. Taking into account the context of the time period, so everything we brainstormed at the very top, okay, and everything the British have done to the Indians. Would you support Gandhi's philosophy if you were an Indian person at that time period?
At that time, I'd probably be too angry to agree with Gandhi's philosophy.
Give me a piece of context that we brainstormed in the beginning. What were some of those things that made you angry?
Like the salt tax, the massacre, the fact that we had to farm for somebody else, we couldn't even farm for ourselves.
There were really mixed feelings at this time on Gandhi's philosophy.
And then the final part becomes a sort of what we call corroboration, comparing these documents. So how can we answer this question, taking everything that we just read and all this knowledge that we have to try and compare and contrast these documents to come to an answer?
So was our guest confirmed that he was going to criticize the March on Washington? Absolutely. So what did he say?
Like, he said they controlled it so tight.
And who controlled it? Who's they?
Like, the president.
Good, so the white
Yeah.
government, right? What was he hoping the March on Washington would be like?
It would shut down the government and the airport and other, large organizations, cause massive economic and political stagnation.
Massive disruption. Is that what happened? No, so he's pissed. Okay. Well, let's look at document F to corroborate. And what's the best way to corroborate a public speech? Something that's private. I like it, Rachel. And what we have here is the Kennedy tapes. So here is a meeting in the White House on August 28th, 1963. I think they appreciate the fact that they're investigating what happened without just being told. And I tell them, they're like CSI detectives. It's not DNA and fingerprints, but it's, speeches and diaries and these audio clips that are their evidence to determine, what really happened.
Students love to debate. I tell them that I'm tricking them in some ways because they're debating history, but they're really debating important questions in history. But they also like to recognize that their classmates have made a good point, but they also like to be recognized for their original thought.
Why did people oppose the Vietnam War? Was it mainly for social, political, or economic?
I think it was political because the citizens of the United States just disagreed with the war because the presidents weren't doing what they wanted them to be doing at the time. In document B, John Kerry.
When we're investigating the questions, it feels like we're actually in that time period. Like, we get to understand how the people felt during the time, and we won't have to think about how we think now and try to translate it to how they felt in the past. It actually has kind of changed my way of thinking because there's always every single thing that happens in life, there's not always one point of view. Like I might see something, you might see it differently. There's always 2 points. There's more than 2 or 2 points of views on every situation going on in life.
The act of teaching students that there isn't a single right answer can, for some teachers, complicate the process of teaching. But our response to that is to appeal to teachers' highest calling, which is the people who go into history teaching is because they want to improve a democratic society.
Is Malcolm X right? Is this thing a sellout? Is this thing, they didn't lay down in the streets, they didn't lay down in the government on the runways. Does that make it ineffective, Chuck?
No, because even though it happened peacefully, it might be a little bit of a sellout, like you said, but it was something peaceful, but it turned out to be great. A point where it starts to kind of change the viewpoint of people.
Yeah, so maybe by giving in a little, by selling out a little and getting Kennedy to support it, they actually still got a lot out of it. What do we do with Malcolm X's comments then?
That he was right, that they gave in a little bit.
Good, so you're not going to sweep it under the rug, right? You're not going to silence it, you're going to include it. And then you wonder why textbooks don't.
So Reading Like a Historian is an attempt to treat high school and middle school students with respect, rather than giving them worksheets and pat answers that they have to repeat from the textbook. It teaches them how to use their minds well by allowing them to come to their own conclusions by examining original documents and engaging the best of their intellectual capabilities.